The physical release of my webcomic Unfamiliar is out in bookstores now. Check out the link below. Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. And for so many artists, I feel like the thing that holds them back the most is their ability to pose their characters. I am no exception to this rule, and I've been struggling with posing well pretty much since the beginning. Here are some examples of some of my earlier art, and even though I think that some of it looks pretty good, like it's interesting, and especially because I was only like 16 or so at the time, I'm still pretty proud of this work, but I feel like there's so little energy because of the poses. So I wanted to do this little video to talk about some of the things that I've done to make my posing a little bit better, and it can really add a lot to your character-based illustrations. So first I'm showing you, I would say, the main poses that I try to avoid nowadays. The 3/4 bust shot is like one of the most common for artists to do. It's extremely easy, I would say, because it's at a 3/4 view. It helps avoid the issues that you get from like perfect symmetry from a character facing perfectly forward. So like drawing the other eye, there's a little bit more latitude because one of the eyes is like farther away from the camera, and generally it just makes things pretty easy, and oftentimes you can just leave the arms down so you don't have to draw hands. This is a very easy sort of like crutch of a pose, and I feel like it's not very exciting to look at, so I try to avoid it nowadays when I'm trying to do something a little bit more active. The other two poses that I see a lot and that I used to draw a lot are these two standing poses where the characters are just faced perfectly forward, and usually for like guy characters they're always like holding a weapon of some kind over their shoulder and maybe their hands on their hips. For girls, their feet are turned in on each other and their hands are hidden behind their back. There's a few variations of this like very bland basic standing pose, and again, while there's nothing actually wrong with these poses, it doesn't make your art bad or anything. I feel like there's a couple things you can do to make your posing a lot more exciting and give you more options in the future. One of my first recommendations is actually to get inspired. I find that music videos are sometimes the best for this. It's hard to actually like come up with a pose in your mind that is like particularly interesting, and so if you're just looking for a pose that's cool and dynamic and will be fun to draw, watch one of your favorite music videos and just randomly screenshot stuff, and it can kind of give you an idea of some poses that are a little more natural, and you can watch them when they're in movement, which is even more helpful. So for example, this scene from Lionhearted, it's a Porter Robinson music video, I slowed down his walk here and I just looked at the poses that he's striking as his feet hit the concrete, and this gave me inspiration for an illustration that I can do with these poses in mind. It's really great to have references that are actually moving like this so you can see the pose in motion. When we're drawing an image, we're always taking a snapshot, but almost all of the time, like, your poses are actually just a point where a character would be moving, right? Even if they're holding completely still, like, people are always moving a little bit. We always have like some idle animation. So thinking about motion can be really helpful, especially if you are doing a more dynamic pose like walking. So for example, it's easy to forget that when somebody's walking, usually their head is forward a little bit, there's a little momentum, and just having a reference that you can actually like see what would this pose look like before and after this point that I'm drawing it, it can make it so much easier. It's a much better reference than just looking at like, you know, a life drawing or something, you know, an image of someone. Music videos are so great for that. When considering the motion of a pose, remember a few different things. Usually when the character is moving, there will be part of their body that is striking down. So in the example of this walk, the foot that's in the front is going to be the one striking down, and so the majority of the character's weight will be going from the center of their body down through the sole of their foot. Keeping that in mind can help you figure out where to place the foot. You need it to be able to take the weight of the body, and because the character is moving, it's going to be a little bit forward from the majority of their body weight, because they are, moving forward. So the point at which their foot will have to take that weight is actually going to be a little farther back as they move forward. And when you're thinking about momentum, usually the head leads with momentum. So if a character is being pushed backwards or falling backwards, usually their chest and head will be the part that's fallen farthest, whereas other parts of their body, like their arms and their legs, might be in front of them because those parts haven't really caught up, and those aren't the heaviest parts of the body, so they're less affected by gravity. Stuff like that can really help you decide how to pose your character in a logical way. So the other major thing to think about when you're drawing your characters in a pose is where their weight is going. And I talked a little bit about that with the striking foot, but weight really does determine how you place a character's limbs most of the time. And even in a very static pose, this is still extremely important. I've talked a bit in the past in videos about posing, like this one, which is quite old and a little outdated, but still has some good information, about how helpful it is to draw your characters from the point at which their weight is being held. So in a standing pose, that usually means drawing them from the feet up. Most people naturally have the inclination to draw characters from the head down, or something like that, but it can be really, really helpful to start with where their weight is being held, because it just allows you to have a better understanding of how they're essentially holding themselves up from gravity, and thinking about it in that way can be really helpful too. So in this leaning pose, there's 2 points at which the character's weight is being held, on the elbow and on one of his feet. The other foot is actually a balancing limb. So with balancing limbs, they don't actually hold as much weight, and they're usually just offset from the angle at which the weight is being held, if that makes sense. So in this crazy standing pose where the character is putting almost all their weight on the one foot, the other foot has to be kicked off a little farther away to help balance them. And the arm also does the same thing. This can give a sort of more whimsical and more easygoing sort of look to a pose, having limbs that are basically just being used for balance. And like in this leaning pose, that other leg being kicked back makes them look a lot more casual than if their feet were in sort of like lockstep next to each other. So keep that in mind and just try to balance their weight over their feet and whatever limbs are propping them up. Thinking about the weight distribution can really make your poses a lot more realistic looking and more interesting. I exaggerated these poses a little bit, so they actually look kind of funky, but you get the idea. Now, on top of everything I've already told you, one of the biggest things that has helped me with illustration in general and with poses is doing these little thumbnails first. I've said this over and over. It's the number one thing that I learned in art school that I wasn't doing before I went there, and that is to just take a moment before you jump into your final drawing and do a couple different versions in a small, tiny little box where you can barely see what you're drawing, and do like a super scrappy version, and then pick the one that you like the best. A lot of the times I still end up picking one of my first or second ideas, but it's just good for your brain to experiment a little bit and think in different ways before you commit to what you're doing. And I find that it helps so much with posing, because my first instinct with poses are usually very boring. This is something I struggle with a lot. So it's really, really helpful to do this just to break out of like your habits. The other thing to think about is giving them something to do and giving them an energy level. When you think about this before you draw the pose, it helps you decide how you're going to actually draw them. So giving them something to do automatically makes a pose 100 times more interesting. We like to see stories, essentially, and giving them an action just makes it a little bit more like a story rather than just a pretty picture with really nothing to say. Like, because she's actually flower picking, it gives us an impression that she's like in this world, she like exists and she has her own like things that she does, you know, she's not just standing there to be looked at. And giving her an energy level, so I decided she was like very tired. It made me draw this pose in a way that wasn't as exaggerated, and there's a little bit more like heaviness and weight to her pose. It just helps you make decisions about the pose that otherwise you would have to pick arbitrarily, and taking some of that choice away from yourself actually makes things so much easier. Anytime I do make a video with like tutorial style information, I do always like to clarify that there's nothing wrong with doing the traditional poses that a lot of beginner artists use. Again, it's something that I still do like pretty regularly, so I don't intend to make anyone feel bad with this or tell you that you can't draw that way. I just wanted to offer up some of the tips that I have utilized in my own art practice that have helped me sort of expand my horizons and do more different poses. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them. Again, my book is out in stores officially, so if you would like to buy Unfamiliar, there's a link down below, as well as, you know, you could just go to a bookstore and maybe check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much to my wonderful patrons, including Heartless Doll, Scarities, BitQ1, Ava Kerner, Soy Milk, Kizart, Finn Must Die, Aries Chaos, Solar System, Live, Salty Jackrabbit, News Milk, Ravenscrow, Saucelot, T-Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Gender Was Stolen, it's Jamal, K, Moo Milk, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astral Fox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Michael Lavali, Cutie Pie, Ruin Raincrow, Rainwater Pearls, Ice Cream Pal, Life on Mars, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Live.